Jay Maas, very excited to have you on.
What's up, people? Happy to be here. I got severance, and at that point, I think I'd been recording like a year and a half, something like that. And I remember just kind of going home and feeling weird, like I don't have a job, but I also have some income for 6 months. I'm sure there is. Yeah.
I'm sure there is, but I don't know that.
I am so susceptible to
you
shock.
won't do it.
You won't do it. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I would do it. You know.
That's why a hardware distressor feels so good.
That's why a hardware distressor, baby.
What made you kind of decide to hop back into the whole like band thing?
Yeah, dude, I'm still wondering.
And welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I am your host, Drew. Here on the podcast, we explore what it's like building, running, and working out of a home studio. We talk with guests across the industry, and today I have one of those with me. I'm excited, Jay Maas, very excited to have you on the show today. So, Jay, say hello to the people.
What's up, people? Happy to be here.
Yeah, man. Very pumped to have you. Jay's an incredible producer, mixer, CEO of Monster.io, an incredible, online mastering situation, founder of Fast Track Academy, founding member of Defeater, and current member of Love Letter. Make sure I got that correct. And yeah, man, I'm very pumped to have you on just to talk about some of your background, a lot of what you're doing in the educational space, in the software side, and like the new band and all that kind of stuff has been going to be a cool conversation. I'm very pumped.
Yeah, dude, pumped to dig in. Happy to dig into all that.
Yeah. So let's maybe, for the starters, for those that maybe don't have a, understanding of kind of where you came from and stuff like that, let's kind of start. Best place to start, this is the beginning sometimes. Let's begin at the beginning.
Sure.
And then we'll go from kind of there to how you got to where you are now. And obviously, there's a lot of minutia there that we can touch on as we go. But we'll start with the short and sweet of it.
Yeah, sounds great. So, if you want to start at the beginning, it was the 7th grade. My best friend was getting a drum set for Christmas and said, "You should get a guitar." And so I did. And little did I know that, over 30 years later, my life would follow that track pretty closely. And so started bands, through my teen years. I was always into skateboarding. Through my teens, my goal was to be a professional skateboarder. I became semi-pro for a little bit, and I'm 6'4".
Wow.
I hurt my knee, and it was sort of like, maybe I should focus on music, because it was pretty clear that I wasn't going to be able to keep up. Just my knee went out. That was kind of it. So I had been interested in music through my teens and played in bands the whole time because I was into skateboarding. I was into punk rock, and all that stuff. So yeah, that all sort of combined together to make me sort of like the music, skateboarding, punk archetype that I think we know all too well.
Yep.
So that led me to, graduating high school, and the guidance counselor and everyone at my high school basically saying like, hey, we have a very prestigious school here in Boston called Berklee College of Music. They said you should go to Berklee. I applied. I got into Berklee. I had already done the Berklee summer sessions the year before, in between my junior and my senior year of high school. And it was cool, but I kind of like got a feel for what the school was like. I was a little hesitant, to be honest. I was really just going because, I was 17 at the time, and everyone's telling you, hey, like, you're the music guy, like, you got to go to the music college. And so I went for a day. I dropped out after one day in Berklee. That's my famous story. And I went for computer science somewhere else instead, which ties into my story pretty elegantly. But in doing so, hilariously, after I started my studio in my early 20s, Berklee College of Music started sending me interns. So I always thought that was like kind of ironic.
That's really funny.
Yeah, I lasted a day and then started interning people for their college. I was like, just
that's kind of backwards, right? Kind of backwards, right?
Yeah, kind of backwards. Yeah. Yeah.
I did a very similar thing where I like went to school for music for like a year or two, and then very much hard dropped out because I went for education. So they started putting me in with classes and teaching middle schoolers and stuff like that. And I stepped foot in one class and I was like, this is not it for me. From like an educational perspective, I just don't want to teach middle schoolers. So and they're wild. And
Oh
just,
yeah, I bet.
I mean, I know you have kids as well. It's like kids are crazy, especially when there's an entire room of them with drums and trumpets and horns and all that stuff. It just gets insane. So so I very much hard pivoted out of that as quickly as possible, but then later got a job at a private college teaching production as well.
Oh, cool.
Without a degree. This is
Isn't
very
funny?
backwards. Very backwards.
Yeah. Degrees are funny, man. I have a lot of people who are in like different computer science fields and then different audio fields. And I have some friends who are in the video game industry. You know, I have like one of my friends is one of the lead like AI guys at Rockstar Games. You know what I mean?
That's awesome.
And you know, a lot of the people on I got to know the guy that runs like basically head of audio over at Rockstar. You know, and he was like, I don't think anyone on our audio team has an audio degree. You know what I mean?
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really funny. So you kind of do it in the thing. What was the launch for you? Obviously, there's some band stuff that kind of happened in the middle of there, but how did you get from, you know, you're dropping out and you're starting your studio career to, was it as simple as you dropped out and you just like had a part-time job and started chugging at the studio thing? Did you immediately jump into the studio thing and it was like full-time business for you?
You know, I started touring that same summer. I started touring when I was 17 too. So that was part of it. Like before my first day at Berkeley, I had already done like a full East Coast tour at 17.
Oh, wow.
And I was lucky enough that I met people from, I'm from a really small town. And so I met people from a bigger town here in like the greater, you know, Boston metropolitan area. And I was more into like punk and emo and hardcore to some degree, but I come from that side of things more. I met these guys who came in more through like metal and they needed a guitar player. I don't listen to much metal. I'm not a metal guy like at all, but I learned the songs and it taught me all kinds of new picking techniques, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, I go on that tour and then that kind of starts me on this trajectory of like, that band goes on tour, that does okay. I'm in school for something else. And then that band turns into another band, which no one's, if anyone who's watching this heard of this band, I'd be very surprised because we didn't do much. It was called Pictures of Gabriel was the name of the band. But we were one of the very first bands signed to a record label out here called Death Wish Records. And Death Wish Records does, you know, Converge, Boy Sets Fire, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, so that was especially at that age, I was still a teenager. I was like 19, I think, at that point. And I was like, holy shit, you know, like I'm playing these shows, like someone's putting out my record, like we're going into the studio. And I think the first spark was when I want to say I was 19, I think so. We went and recorded with another engineer who became a very close friend named Kurt Ballou. He's the guitar player of Converge. And I didn't know him from a hole in the wall. Some guy in my band was like, yeah, we're recording with Kurt. And I was like, okay,
cool.
Hey, Kurt. Yeah. And I didn't understand like that
the legend behind him.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And, you know, and honestly, at this point, it was probably 1999.
So they weren't quite that the legend that they are like nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, like, but I will say, like, I learned very quickly that they were already like really respected, and that like it was there was something special there. I think there's still something special there.
Well, yes.
And so, and so I was like, okay, but anyway, I'm in the studio. This is my first real studio experience. That's not just at my buddy's house with a 4-track or something like that. Man, I'm so green. I have no idea. But it was, now Kurt and I record similarly, but differently, whatever. But the main thing I took away from it was like, I was like, holy shit. It was both things that I love. It was like technology, right? And then art and creativity like merged together. Yeah. And that's sort of what I always wanted to do. And that really, really stuck with me. I didn't know yet that I was going to go down that path. But as I kept playing with that band throughout my early 20s, you know, when you're early 20s, it's so transitory. You know, you're living in this house, you're living in that house, you're like in this band, now I'm in this band. Yeah. And you're doing, you know,
you're flying by the seat of your pants like crazy. Totally. You're sleeping on couches. Yeah, man.
Exactly. Yeah. That was kind of a fun time, you know?
Yeah.
You're just like, you're just broke. And
it's every hardcore kid in his 20s, man.
Yeah, exactly. So, same here. So I just, I had recorded with Kurt one or two more times, but I got to know him. I'd see him around, and he was building a new studio. It's the studio that he's in now. Yeah, basically, he's now also building another mixing studio, but his primary God city is in Salem, Massachusetts. I saw him at a show in Salem, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to come see the build out?" And I was like, "Yeah, for sure." Started. I think I did one or two more, either mixing things with him or whatever. But I started getting into recording around that time too. I'd moved into the seminal. Excuse me.
No, you're good.
The seminal like punk house. That like everyone lives in with all the roommates and shit.
Yep.
I turned the basement into what would become my very first studio, and so I started sending him mixes, and one thing led to another. I used my computer science background. At this point, I'm like 23, 24. I used it as a way to make money. I had this IT job at a hot tub company of all places, like the most like job, where I all right, and then come home and try to take time off to go on tour and play in bands. I got laid off right around the time. I've told the story before, but I think it's kind of funny. Like the canary in the coal mine for if a housing recession is about to happen is if people stop buying hot tubs, right? Because it's like first thing like you're not going to buy is a hot tub.
That's really funny.
So if you want to know, like, watch the hot tub market very closely if you're wondering whether or not there's a housing crisis on the horizon. Because I can tell you in 05 or so, we were like, why aren't we selling any hot tubs? Right. And I just saw like the CFO get laid off, and I saw like this happening, and I was like, oh shit, like it's gonna come for me. And it did.
Yep.
So I got laid off. It happened. I got severance, and at that point, I think I'd been recording like a year and a half, something like that. And I remember just kind of going home and feeling weird, like I don't have a job, but I also have some income for 6 months. It's funny, dude, when you're young, like 6 months, you're like, that's like a lot of runway. You know what I mean? Now I'm in my 40s and I'm like, 6 months, it's like nothing. But I thought to myself, and kind of thank God I did, I was like, I'm going to take this 6 months and I am going to dedicate like as much as I can to recording. And I'm going to see if I can make, like, I was making like a little bit of side money recording, I was doing the punk bands out in my area. I was doing like random hip hop guys, whatever would walk through the door when I first started. And so I just started, and I kept going and kept going to shows, kept being in bands, kept playing in bands, kept like cultivating and developing those relationships, which was a perfect way for me to be like, I should record your band, and then having people come in and just, I mean, dude, I've recorded thousands of bands, like so many. And, and so that just kind of makes you good, whether you want to or not. Like it just makes you good.
The repetition of it.
Yeah. And also, and having Kurt to bounce things off of too was like amazing, right? He was really helpful just to even get affirmation that like my work was improving. And through that network, there's a guy in the area, Nick Zampiello, who's a mastering engineer. I could send things to him. He would, I was just getting feedback from all like the people that were like, a couple steps up ahead of me. And I would just take that feedback and I'd really take it to heart. I was really, really focused. And lo and behold, I was able to pay my bills. And I just kind of kept it going.
I think that is a thing that a lot of people that are first getting into music production nowadays like take for granted. The being a part of your, even if it's just your local area, your local scene of music, whatever, like being ingrained in that, though obviously times have changed a little bit with how that functions, but even in online spaces, being a part of that scene can be massively helpful when you're first starting out, not only being able to bounce things off of people, ideas off of people, mixes or productions off of people, but also just broadening that general network of connection that you have through people and being like, oh yeah, you're coming down on an East Coast tour and I live in Florida. Sure. Like, come on, like I'll come, you can stay at my house. Like, Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more. Without that local network of a bunch of knuckleheads, really, guys who like some guys taking it more seriously than others, like whatever, but you would, for every 10 bands you record, maybe one or two would actually like tour or would actually turn in something. But dude, you just never know. I remember recording this group of kids and they were like the drummer was 12. And I was like, is this weird? You know, like, what am I doing? But like his mom dropped him off, and I like met the mom, and I was like, hey, how's it going? And this is Daniel, whatever. Anyway, that band turned into a band called Transit, you know, and Transit went on to do, you know, like went on to be Transit. And so it was just like, you don't know. And it was, you'd have people come into the studio and you do your thing. And sometimes your gut was right. You know, another one, I kind of knew this one because Jeff from Run for Cover Records was involved, but I remember when Title Fight walked through the door, right? They were really young, and they're fucking Title Fight, man.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
And I feel like I'm sure you have also on the counter argument of that, of bands that you were like, oh, this band's going places, man, and then they just implode or explode, or things just go sideways. And
it totally. Sometimes it blows up, but like sometimes, I mean, some of my favorite records. It's funny. It's like the ones that like I get really into, like the ones that like really hit home for me. I feel like I've always had this taste that is like just slightly deviated from like what's popular. You know, like it's like maybe the stuff that's like a little bit more nuanced and like a little bit more mature, like really good musicianship and stuff like that. And I'm like, this band's fucking got it. You know what I mean? And like they do pretty well. They'll tour and stuff, but like it never gets that like liftoff moment. And then it'll be the ones that are like, not in a bad way at all, but it'll just be the ones that are like a little bit more straightforward, a little bit like right on the nose with the trend that's going on at that time,
with maybe like a small tweak to the trend or something.
Yeah, exactly. But like, exactly, like doing the trend well in their own way. But it's like part of like a bigger thing that really lifts like a lot of bands up. I saw that with I saw it in hardcore. I've seen it with like you know, punk and emo and like whatever you want to call, like, you know, because I've worked with like State Champs and Citizen and like all of those types of bands too. Like I saw like all of that stuff. Kind of all elevate together, you know?
Yeah. No, and doing that for such, you know, I mean, you've been, I think at this point, what, you're 20, 30 years? Yeah. I can't remember. Like,
Jesus. I've been recording. I've been recording for about 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah. Attempting it, you know, since you were young and, you know, all that kind of stuff accounted for. But recording professionally 20 years. And it's like you see a lot of come and go and trends come and go and all that kind of stuff. And like I same thing, even on a smaller level for me, there are records that I can almost guarantee no one's going to hear that are some of my favorite records of all time. There's a local band from my area here in Greenville called Curfew. Indie pop band, like before indie pop had that like secondary rise, and they're doing like live kit stuff with all like no programmed, all synths, like it was super sick, and I got to mix it and I was super pumped about it. And then like they put out the record and the band broke up, and I was like, nobody's ever gonna hear this band, but I love this record so much.
I mean, I think that's kind of how you have to look at it sometimes too. Like I think most of us are, I'll put it this way, honestly, like I'm fortunate enough to know some pretty seminal engineers, and like I think all of us, and them, myself included, and all of them, like we do records that go crazy. Like, you know, where I was just looking at like Bane has been touring the world recently, and like dude, I'm looking at these, I'm remembering when we recorded these songs, and I'm just like watching their Instagram, and I'm like, it's like 5,000 people singing along. You know what I mean? Like something like just insane. And I'm like, wow, like we made that. Like that is so on one hand, I think every producer that gets to a certain level, like you have those and you're like, wow, like I really created something that reached so many people. And like, that is so fucking awesome. But then we all also have like, I made a record that I really like.
We spent so much time. There's so much heart in this record. Everybody put everything into this record, and it's dope. And nobody's gonna hear it. And you know what? That's a for me record, honestly. That's what I tend. You know, we get into this to make dope art, right? And whether, you know, obviously you want people to hear it, but at the same time, for some of these records, it's like, all right, well, if it's not going to go anywhere, at least I have it for myself. Yeah,
and you just kind of have to accept that you never know. You know, there's been a few times where I felt like I could really call it, but then there's been a few times too where I thought I was calling it, and it it wasn't it.
Yeah. This episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast is sponsored by BLEASS. BLEASS is an audio development company who crafts intuitive digital audio effects and instruments. They've collaborated with artists like Jean-Michel Jarre and Jordan Rudess and have an incredible selection of over 26 different plugins for Mac, Windows, and iOS for all of my mobile producers out there. Whether you are looking for an inspiring synth like the Megalith synth, maybe some classic compressors, filters, or chorus plugins, or if you want to get out of the box with something a little more creative like the Phase Mutant, they have something for everyone. Right now, when you go to bliss.com, that's BLEASS.com, and use the code HOMESTUDIOHANGOUT, all caps, you get up to 20% off your order. Thank you to Bliss for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Now let's get back to the conversation. You are also the CEO of Monster, and I would love to talk about, like, so you've been doing this production thing for a long time, mixing at at that point. How did you get into the I guess the software side of things, and what was that look like for you?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, like I come from a computer science background. I dropped out of Berkeley to do computer science, right? And so I've loved music. I've always loved tech. I've just always been a big nerd. Even the way I approach recording, like right when I came into recording was like right when people were like, what kind of console are you going to get? And I was like, I'm not going to get a console.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And people were like, but how are you going to record? And I was like, with software.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So coming from like a more software slant of things, I've had that in the back of my, as my career evolved, I evolved into a mastering engineer, started getting way more with mastering. I remember like early on, mastering Counterparts and Ceremony and mastering a bunch of records for Bridge 9 Records and like all this stuff, and starting to feel more confident in that world. And, taking on mastering as something I took pretty seriously. It's just like how my brain works. I was really like, what am I really like doing here? Like, you know what I mean? Like when I think about it, when I break down, like, what am I doing? We're mastering. Yes, there's like an art to it, like the black art of mastering, but it's a lot of science, right? It's a lot of reductive science. It's a lot of, okay, here's where we're starting. What are my variables? What's the overall dynamic structure of this song look like? What does the overall like sonic shape of the song looks like by and large, right? And where is it important to look for these things primarily, right? Because if we understand general song structure, then we understand that like the more full frequency moments are often in the denser parts, which are going to be probably the choruses, that type of stuff, where kind of everything hits. And that's where like we culminate all the different elements and aspects of a song. So as mastering engineers, a lot of times we're solving for, a lot of our solving is for that part of the song. It's not to say we won't automate different spots and like whatever, but like the big equation can be for that part. And because that's where we need to know what's peak, what's maximum peak volume, what's maximum average volume, in RMS terms. And so we just, without nerding out too hard for your audience here, I'm sure this is the right audience to know.
Oh yeah, it is.
But like, we're just gathering data. And so I was thinking like as human beings, like that's like what we're doing. Right. And so, and here's like what happens, right? You like solve for a big chorus, and then, the verse, right, is like a lo-fi tight hi-hat verse, like classic, explodes into the thing. And a lot of times you don't want to solve for the micro moment, right? You want to let the mix, the autonomy of the mix, not be basically bastardized by the mastering. And you don't want to like, horrendously like contort every part of the song to fit some sort of mold. You are making the song pleasant on all possible playback devices. Is sort of like what we're really trying to do. And then there's the positive aspects, if you do it well, that come from that. Like the snare sits a little better, and like, you know what I mean? The hi-hat isn't as annoying, and like there's just like all kinds of stuff that happen.
The vocals push back into the mix a little bit more.
Exactly.
The guitars feel wider, stuff like that.
All of that. Yeah, like all of that stuff. And so, after over a decade of mastering, just I was like, what am I doing? So I started to think to myself, like, could I write a program just locally? I'm just fucking curious. Can I write something that can do this? Or like every mastering engineer is different. Every mastering software is different. Even if you're using AI to master, you're imparting. Well, if you use mine, you're imparting my preferences, right? Like it's my brain, right? It's like I'm quality controlling all of our tolerances for all of our code, right? So like, I was like, so no, there's an unlimited different amount of ways we can have a great master, right? Like different little on the spectrum variations of gray, whatever you want to call it, right? That a song can be mastered well. That's why you could go to Ted Jensen, you could go to Mike Kalasian, you know what I mean? You could go to whoever, right? What's again, the West Side guy, right? You could go, right, Alan. And like all three masters are different. All three masters are great, right? So I was like, okay, so there is not one solution here, but there's definitely a difference between this is a good master and this master sucks, right? And so I was like, can I make something that makes good masters? You know, so I really nerdy. I built something local. It wasn't in the cloud yet. It wasn't. It was just on my machine, and I would get mastering work in. And for about a 6-month period or so, I was tweaking it, and I was using my mastering clients as guinea pigs, and I would master the record like normal. Like, I don't know, for the people behind me can see. I don't know how much you can see behind me. I got very Muse, and I got every whatever, like everything you'd want, right? So I was mastering like normal, but I would also say, hey, I made 2, and like, let me know if you have a preference. The software started winning, like not maybe like half the time, and I was like,
wow,
fuck, like
that's good.
It works, you know?
Damn.
Right. Like this is like a double blind, like non-biased thing. Like this works. So I was like, okay. And then I remember like talking to my wife about it, and I was like, do I make this like a product? You know? I was like, it'd probably be really helpful for people, you know. I love it. I get hit up all the time. People are like, hey, just so you know, like, we use this for our real record. That's like, has hundreds of thousands of streams on Spotify. Like, we used it, and like, that's the master. And it feels so cool to hear that. And, you know,
I used it for one, and it broke 500,000 the other day. So
really?
Yeah. And it was a hip hop pop kind of deal. So like,
love to hear it.
Like, not your genre really. Normally, like, people, I wouldn't think of you as that type of person, you know,
totally.
But it just worked.
That's so awesome, dude. I love hearing that. Think about that. Like, I made something in conjunction. We'll get to Joe, my partner in the company in a second too, but I made something. And like, just from your efforts alone, 500,000 people. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, are hearing it. It's just so sick. I fucking love that. Anyway, moving on. So I start interviewing developers. So I'm not like a front end web, because it's just like, it's like being into computer science doesn't mean that you're a master of every discipline inside, right? It
is a, I would argue, computer science is the black hole, whereas mastering is the black hole of the music industry. Like, the plugin development is like a very similar black hole of like, I don't understand anything about what's going on here with this.
Well, to be fair, there's a lot to understand. So it's completely fair. So I'm interviewing. I even almost hire like a particular developer, and then I wasn't feeling perfect about how that one was going, and I think I was on like a 14th, 15th interview. I talked to this guy who I just got referred through Facebook, and his name's Joe, and he's like, we're on the phone. I'm talking through how I think it should work, and we're talking through like some sort of like napkin math versions of like the technical aspects of like, you know, how we think we would sort of deploy a strategy to like bring this to market. And I told him my whole spiel, you know, and he was just like, so that would work, but it's a bad way to do it. And I was like, oh yeah? And he's like, yeah, you're going to want to, and it was just like, boom, 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 boom. Yeah. And I was like,
it made everything make way more sense than you could have possibly dreamt of. Yeah,
where I was like, oh, you can like do that? And he's like, uh-huh. And I was like, well, we should do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Way more optimized. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so, I mean, his name's Joe Tagliaferro. He's so he's now the co-owner of the company, co-founder of really a co-founder of what the company really is. He's also a developer over at Reddit. He's a super, super talented guy. And yeah, he helped me bring this to market. And I mean, I don't know. I know we've mastered over 250,000 songs now. You know, it's crazy. And it's just awesome. I encourage everyone to give it a try. Obviously, like, you've used it with some success yourself. And, you know, it's just a great tool. I had someone, the guy he's in a band called Single Mothers, but he also has something called the Drew Thompson Project. And he hit me up and he was just like, dude, it's just such a great tool for someone like me who's like, a lot, I think, you know, right? We're in the home studio hangout, right?
Yeah.
Or so it's like a lot of people are creating at home, but just like you said, like mastering is sort of like this black hole, dark art.
Yeah.
And it's not that interesting to a lot of people. It's like,
yeah,
it's like, I want to put reverb on my vocals and I want to add backing harmonies and I want to write the best fucking chorus of all time. Yeah. I don't want to learn how to master.
Yeah.
You know?
They people barely want to learn how to mix.
Right.
Nonetheless, the next step. So
yeah, so it's been great, man. You know, it's up and running and we're working on it all the time. So like we quietly launched that song that you were talking about. When did you use the platform for that one?
I can tell you in 2 seconds. That song has 790,000 streams. June 26th, 2019.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah. That's great, dude. Well, that's so cool to hear.
Every song from that year for me ran through Master. So
that's awesome.
So yeah, it was a big, that specifically, that artist, a lot of his songs were through that as well. He was a big fan of using that year. Yeah,
it's so cool to hear that from you, because it's like, we know this stuff is quietly going on. Like, you know, we're like, well, at any given point, like, our AI is mastering stuff. Like, it's definitely mastering music as we're having this conversation.
Being used, you know, it's being used. Yeah,
but we don't like you know, for data reasons, and we don't have the time. Like, we don't know.
Sure.
Like, it's but yeah, like that song has like what did you say, over 700,000?
Yeah, 790,000. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be 1 million before you know it. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, it's super. It is. I would agree. Like, I think anybody who's listening to this right now should go check it out. And I know you do like that. You have like the thing where you can test and run it through it and A/B it and all that kind of stuff. And like, try it out. It's super sick. I love using it for, you know, and like, I love using it for. I have artists that I use it for, and they love it, and so we kind of just use it on that. And yeah. And I think everybody should check it out, especially in the home studio space, because we're not optimized for mastering in our spaces.
Totally.
We're in cubes.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. You're in the worst design.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
I am in
cubes.
Exactly. I am in a literal square right now.
Right,
and it is not great for I fight a lot of stuff whenever I have to get mixes across. If you're enjoying this podcast episode, you might like my newsletter, The Music Maker's Handbook. In this newsletter, I dissect everything from books, podcasts, YouTube videos, to bring you insights from people across different creative landscapes. It's also a great way to keep up with me, the Home Studio Hangout podcast, and I'm very excited to be showcasing people from the community's projects as well. You can go to the link in the description or go to musicbydrew.com, my website, and sign up there. Now let's get back to the episode. So I would love to then now talk about, you know, the kind of next thing that you did, which was, you know, you started educating. Prior to the Fast Track Academy stuff, you started doing one-on-one. That is where we got connected, was one-on-one mixing, coaching, and stuff like that. And originally, and so how did you get into starting the Fast Track Academy stuff and like the more online education space and all that kind of stuff?
This is kind of funny story too. This one was not immediately my idea, but it was a close friend of mine. His brother runs a golf website called practical-golf.com.
Huh.
And his name's John Sherman, and he's done really well. He's a golf enthusiast. Anyway, he's learned a lot about developing sites for educational and like depending on the, like whether it's golf or whether it's whatever. And
Yeah.
so his brother Dave is a good friend of mine, and Dave calls me and is just like, hey, talk to my brother. He's like looking to expand this to other like worlds essentially, and asked me what I was into. And obviously you and I are both into music, and what do you think? And anyway, after just like a whole bunch of phone calls, we decided to pull the trigger and launch something. It's a really inexpensive way to learn audio production, especially comparatively to like basically any other alternative.
Yeah.
And so we built an educational site where you can get on there and like, especially for your audience, if you're a home studio person, there's a good chance that you haven't learned it all, right?
Yeah,
and, I mean, none of us have, right?
Yeah.
And so it's great. You can just make an account and log in and start, educating yourself. And it was more work than I thought it was going to be. But
it's a lot of video, a lot of video creation stuff that goes into that, and then you're getting into like, all right, I need to make sure that I say this correctly, because if there's a thing that you learn about being in the audio industry with making any kind of content, it is that if you misspeak, you will know about it.
Yeah. I did a video on like shooting out some Marshall amps on my YouTube channel. Yeah, I did the best I could. I thought I knew what was going on with the amps or whatever. Holy hell. The comments. These people, it's not only like...
I feel like guitar amp people are like a whole different like segment of that kind of people.
It's not even like, well, actually in 1973, and you're like, okay, sorry. Whatever. And then it's like, personal. They're like, you need to get off the internet. You need to stop talking. And I'm just like... you're so right. If I misspoke about this 1970s Marshall, I'm doing society a massive disservice. I'm so sorry.
That's amazing. Yeah, guys like I mean, I don't talk about guitar stuff for a reason, but guys like you who maybe do that, or like people like Fluff who their entire channel is based around like guitar stuff. It's like, I know, bro, I'm sorry for the people that you have to deal with sometimes. My gosh.
There's no greater incel behavior than arguing about guitars and guitar amps on the internet.
And not actually making records with any of it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Just knowing facts about amps and then yelling at people about them is fucking hysterical.
It's so funny. It's so funny. But yeah, no, it's a ton of work. Even like just, I've been making a little bit of YouTube content here and there, and like I can't imagine building out an entire course structure around
I've
that
done so
stuff.
many. It's long. I mean, dude, like the one we did for Fast Track, when did I film that? A couple years ago? It was my whole summer. Like,
wow.
It was coming in the studio down here, coming up with like thinking through all the topics in a way that would be of value to other people, thinking about the site structure, thinking about like, like just thinking about it from the consumer, the someone who wants to be educated, like from their perspective, what do they need to know? And then like deconstructing the things that I know in a way where it's like, okay, like, does this make sense to me if I watch this back, if I don't already know what I know, right? That's like the hard one, is like recreating a version of yourself that's like, you don't know anything. Just pretend you know nothing. Can you watch this and does it make any sense?
Yeah, that's really difficult.
Yeah, and so thinking about it from that standpoint, and then knowing that like, well, fuck, if that's the case, I can't really talk about this until I like really explain this. And like, and explaining this is hard because we're talking about sound. You can't like see it or touch it, right? Yep. The best you can do is you can pull up some like analyzers on a screen and you're like, it's that frequency. You know what I mean? Like, that's where it is. And you're like, yeah. So yeah, but yeah, the filming, and then like as my voice is getting hoarse right now, like your voice gets hoarse, and you have to be like, I don't know, like on, You know, like
Yeah.
you're filming. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah. You have to be like dialed up to 11 on your like expressiveness and the way you
Yeah.
talk, and then you flub lines and you have to redo those. And like,
totally.
good Lord, that's the most frustrating thing about making any kind of like hyper edited video stuff is like dealing with all that
Exactly.
kind of stuff. Cause
Well, yeah, never mind if you're doing multicam and then you've
Mhm.
got a screen cap source and then you've got a source from the DAW and then you've got a microphone source and then you get all these tracks and like, so we hired an editor. At some point we were just like, I can video edit just fine, but you know, I was just like, I'm way too overqualified as an audio producer to be spending my time editing these videos.
100%. 100%. There's a reason I outsource like short stuff for most things that I do now. Like I ain't trying to deal with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, no. So the idea for Fast Track is to really, because like the podcast, you know, Home Studio Hangout podcast really like gears itself towards like people that are just getting started in their journey or like in that up to like that lower intermediate level where they're like, I'm taking it seriously. I want this to be my job. I'm trying to either produce mix full time. So, I mean, really Fast Track would be very ideal for like some of those people to go check out. Cause I mean, the ideal is you are taking them from the beginning of the education all the way through, you know,
And
high level mixing.
Totally. And we just filmed. We're bringing other producers on. So we had Alex Garcia Rivera on. He just won a platinum record for Wunderbar. He's on there now. We're bringing on another Alex Estrada out at Pale Moon Ranch. And he did Touche Amore covering Circa Survive songs. So we're going to have that on there. Yeah. So, and that one's all edited. So that stuff's going to go out soon enough. So we're just like, we're strategizing for like our next basically big push in deployment. But we've been talking to, I won't mention other names, but we've got sick names that are going to be on the site. So like we want to make it a place where you can learn from not just me, right? Like I've got my style and hopefully people like my records, whatever it is. But like, you know, even as I'm going to these different studios and talking with these engineers and watching their workflow, you know, it's just fun, right? Because it's like, I go, oh, that's fucking cool. Like that's a neat way. I wouldn't do it that way. Like, or I wouldn't have, but I see why you do it that way. And like, it's really cool.
There's something I mean, that's why I like nerding out about just watching like random YouTube videos or like buying, you know, even when a new course structure comes out and it's somebody that I've never seen before, I'll always like dive into it. And I'll like pay for a couple months of it and like dive into a couple people and be like, oh, that's really interesting. I've never like thought about using that way. Or that's honestly, that's been a cool side thing of the podcast has been like being able to ask like other producers and other mixers like what's a weird thing that you do and be like, oh, that's very left field, and you know being able to plug some of that stuff in. So even for the more, you know, intermediate to established person, it's still incredible source of like continuing education for yourself.
I completely agree, especially if you're dealing with like, you know, we all sort of exist in like in a generalized world, you know what I mean? So when you're sort of like grabbing people who are experts at different corners of our little world, you know, I would quantify that world as like, you know, punk and hardcore and like, you know, metal and emo and like all of this stuff. But like, everything from like a, you know, a Touche Amore to like a Title Fight to then to like way heavier stuff like a Counterparts or
No, that's really sick. So I saw recently you made some changes to your studio. You got the desk and all that kind of stuff. I'd love to know. I didn't get to watch that full thing, but yeah, what was the big update that you made for your
if you can see, it's really just
the desk mainly.
So, dude, when I built this, the desk. When I built this studio, I had a desk that I had forever, and someone gave it to me for $200. And at the time, that was about my desk budget, right? And so I was like, okay, and it could hold all my gear. And it's such a dumb thing because it was just, the desk is fine. And I have great gear, but the gear was down by like my calves, basically, like flanking me down there. And so
you're accidentally kicking stuff and hitting it with your legs and things like that.
And it's
sometimes,
just like, you know, if you want to like turn an EQ, you're going, you're going, and then you're just like come back up and be like, do I like that better? And then like down you go again. And it's just like, it wasn't ideal from that standpoint. But the thing is the dimensions of my studio are like really specific. People probably don't know this, but when I bought this house, so I bought a house arguably is way too fucking big for my family, but I bought it because I needed a lot of space to build the studio. Like that, for me, it was the studio space was the priority. The living space was secondary. And so I bought it on this nice cul-de-sac north of Boston, and I'm doing the demo down here, and we've got this big dumpster out in the yard, and we're getting ready to do the studio build out. And a guy walks across the street, and he looks like an old like rocker guy, boomer, like rocker guy with like the long curly hair,
partial
like,
mullet, yeah,
kind of, yeah. And he comes over and he's like, "Hey, are you the new neighbor?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm the new neighbor." And he's like, "Oh, cool. Like, what do you do?" And I had my garage doors open, and you could see I had Marshall cabs in there, and I think I saw him kind of eyeing those, and I didn't necessarily want people to know like I'm putting a recording studio in the neighborhood. Yeah, right? They're probably worried about like what type of people are going to come over. They're going to be worried about the noise. So I just said, when this was true at the time, I said, "I'm a touring musician." And he goes, "Oh, cool." And he goes, "Anything I would have heard of?" And, I was like, you told him a little bit. And he's like, "Have you ever been to Japan?" And I was like, "We haven't, but we have plans to go." He's like, "Oh, you're going to love it. Japan's awesome." And I was like, "What were you doing in Japan?" And he was like, "Oh, I was doing sound for a band." And I was like, "Oh, what band?" And he was like, "Boston." And I was like,
God.
"Oh, like Rock Legends Boston?"
Small band.
Yeah. And he was like, "Yeah, he was like, I did front of house for them for years. In Japan, we did 90,000 people in stadium." Like, I was just like, bro, I was like, "That's cool." But he goes, "Yeah, I don't do that anymore. I've settled down, and I teach vibrational acoustics at Boston University, and I design recording studios for a living now." And I go, "Come with me."
Yeah.
Right. So,
yeah.
So he was like, "Oh, is that doing it?" I was like, "That's what I'm doing, Rob." Like,
an acoustician just across the street. That's so sick.
Hit his house with a rock from my front door.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah. So he came over and he helped me design this entire place. Everything you see like is not by chance. And so we designed it and stuff. And I said, "Rob, this is like, I guess the desk was already down here. I was like, take this desk into consideration." And so we did. And so we designed it. So anyway, fast forward to like this year. And I built this place in 2012, right? So we're 12 years old now. And so fast forward to this year, and I'm like, fuck, I finally just want to get a desk where my stuff's up here. I'm so tired of leaning over. But I never got rid of it because the desk fits perfectly into the mixing area. And it was just, and like the other thing is like, who wants to rewire your whole studio?
Oh, God, yeah.
And I've got bands in. So it's like, I don't have time to break this whole thing down, And then I finally had the time, in between a couple of records. And so I measured the spot that this goes, and I found a desk on Sweetwater that I was like, "This looks great for what I need." And it said it was a 1/4 inch smaller in total like length than the area it had to fit into. And I called Sweetwater and I was like, "Is it really like that? Is it really that size?" Because I was like, because you have to ship these things freight.
Yeah.
I was like, "I don't want you to freight ship me a desk and it doesn't fit." And they're like, "We're very particular with our measurements." And they're like, "As long as the spot you have is what you say it is, our desk is the size that we say it is." Wow. And so I took a leap of faith. I said, "Well, it better be." And so I ordered it and it showed up. And the first thing I did is I just built out it so that it could stand and be wide. Just because I was like, sick to my stomach over this. Like, what did I just do? And the other thing is, you don't get to test whether or not the desk is going to fit until you completely take apart and dismantle your old desk.
Yeah.
So you're already in, right? You're already like
you're 75% of the way there, maybe 50% of the way there at that point.
Before you find out if this was a terrible idea.
Yeah. Otherwise your freight shipping stuff back and you're not having a desk for a couple weeks while you get the other size. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I push it in, bro, and it was like, I mean, it's an eighth of an inch on each side. There was a
Yeah.
quarter inch total. I have an eighth on each side, and it like, I mean, it looks like it was born there. Like I can't believe it. It fits perfect.
Wow.
I'm just like, yeah. So I got lucky, and dude, when it fit, I was just like, whew,
Oh,
all right.
yeah.
Like, thank God. I was like, then I knew I still had to like rewire the whole thing, and that was
Sure.
going to be a pain in the ass, and all the cable management, but just the fact that it fit, I didn't even care. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
we're good.
No,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see you have a couple pieces back there. What would be what's one of your favorites that you got back there that you're
You know, I can give you the uninteresting answer that's
Sure.
everyone's answer, which is like the distressors. Like it
Sure.
would be tough for me to live without. I
Yeah.
just love them. I also have like Fatsos, which are like sort of distressor-ish.
Yeah, I love Fatsos.
Yeah, same. You know, I've got a manly, like an older, like manly Varimu.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of us like rock guys, we really love, you know, the sounds of the records from like the 90s and stuff. And like, there's some like weird stat that I apparently is true. I never verified this, but this is what I heard. Is that like there was a period of time where like 90% of, you know, music you'd hear on the radio like went through a manly Varimu at like one point in time. And it's probably different now, but I love it. It's it brings, God, I hate studio guy like adjectives, but I'm gonna use some. You know, like
Yeah.
it brings depth. You know, like
Yeah.
to the sound. You know, it's so stupid, but like basically what happens is like there's tubes in it, right? And so
Mhm.
like the non-linearity of tubes and like the way that varying compression works, if people don't know, basically you're just like you're varying the charge to these tubes, right? And if the input signal increases, the charge to the tubes in the signal path decreases, and that gives you a very smooth curve because like it's a physical thing that's like kind of heating up and cooling down like,
Yeah.
with the charge, right? And so they're not fast compressors for that
Yeah.
reason, but they're great for bus work because they're not fast. And the tubes themselves, if you have good tubes and you take care of them, they are they add that all of like the nice harmonics. You know how like
Mhm.
when you get distortion in the analog domain, it always sounds better than digital
Yeah.
distortion, right? And so it's like
It's why
it's the
that's
same-
why a hardware distressor feels so good.
that's why a hardware distressor, baby.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yep. And so it's the same shit, right? But it's
Yeah.
done a different way. But like you get all of like the non-linearities, you get all of the tubeness of
Yeah.
real tubes, and it's great. It's on, you know, it's on every record I do. So yeah, I
The-
love my
the-
Varimu.
The handful of times I've used a Varimu at studios that I've, you know, used or rented out, or I worked in one that had a Varimu for a while in their rack setup. And yeah, I agree. I hate like the producer engineer terminology, but it is the definition of lush.
Yeah, it's super lush.
It's
Yeah.
insanely thick, like
Mhm.
compared
That's right.
to almost anything I've ever heard in that same domain.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Lush is a really good shitty adjective. To
Yeah,
use for
exactly.
yeah. But yeah, there's something about it. It like it thickens yet adds a sheen,
Hmm.
but if anything makes it like less muddy.
Hmm.
It's yeah, like you know, because there's like you could try to emulate it, but like
Yeah.
sometimes the saturation in those low mid range areas get like gross and muddy,
Mhm.
and this thickens things in a way where I'm like, oh, it's like thicker, and I feel like I still get like a little bit more instrument separation from being able to hear things. I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely does something to like I think it's probably the tube saturation in that low mid area that just like
Yep.
feels like it pulls everything apart a little bit more.
Yep.
I'm sure there's like literal science that dictates a lot of that stuff, but
I'm sure
just
there is. Yeah.
I'm sure there is, but I don't know that. It's
Yeah.
just more of the types of music because the studio that I worked out of did a lot of CCM, did a lot of pop rock stuff, and did a lot of country. And so low mid in a lot of those things is obviously low mid in everything is kind of important, but low mid in those are like there's a lot of interesting definitions in there with like the way drums sit and the way and the keys that they're playing in
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like the way that the drums sound for country music is like very specific, obviously.
Mhm.
So those areas are very easy to get overlappy with a lot of different, you know, frequencies and everything, and having
Definitely.
something that especially on like a drum bus that like just pulls everything apart, or a master bus that
Mhm.
just pulls that area apart a little bit more is really, really nice. So I'd love to talk about Love Letter and what made you kind of decide to hop back into the whole like band thing.
Yeah, dude, I'm still wondering.
Because you were out of it. You were out of it for a good while.
I was, yeah. So, in my mid 30s, I wanted to start a family. I met my
Mhm.
wife on tour in Australia, and it was really clear that we wanted to have a kid like ASAP.
Yeah.
And we did. And so I certainly didn't want to be on the road,
Mhm.
or anything like that. So I very much leaned into like producer dad studio life,
Yep.
and still love it. I think for a lot of us, lifer, musician, creative types, there's just, I'd sit around with Andy, our drummer, right? Just like we're both football fans, watching
Mhm.
like, football in the fall. And, we'd just be talking about like, we did Defeater together and, just shooting the shit, whatever. And kind of
Mhm.
both like realizing we both sort of still have an itch.
Mhm.
Um, whatever. At some point, I think my wife was like, will you guys stop talking about this and do it? And we were like, by the way, that's a very good way to get me to do anything. I am so susceptible to like
To like you won't
jock,
do
like
it.
you won't do it. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I would do it. I'll
That's
start like a whole other band because
that's the,
you dared me.
I feel like that's is that the Boston in you, bro?
It might be, dude.
It feels very northeast
Yeah,
like
yeah.
island.
Like what?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I did it. And I have the luxury, or I should say the honor of producing records for lots of labels. And Iodine Records was really starting to fire back up. I developed a great relationship with the owner of the label, Casey. And I ran it by him. I was thinking about doing this, and we talked. And I'll be honest, I was sort of like floating the idea of like, I have a studio, I can make a great record. What if I just do that?
Yeah.
And then nothing else.
Yeah.
And Casey was like, no, you can't do nothing. And I was like, all right. And
You're right.
so,
Damn it, you're right.
I'm glad that he didn't allow me to do nothing, because it's clear I wanted to make the record. And we've already played, not a lot, but we've probably played 5 or so shows. They've all been great. And we're playing with Soul Glow on Monday in Providence. We're playing with a great band called No Man in Boston in August. And then we're playing with Further Seems Forever in Tampa. We're playing Fest again this year. And then we have an unannounced overseas tour coming up for 2025. So, like with Defeater, dude, I was like on the road 6 months out of the year at the end. It was like, it's pretty life consuming.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to do that anymore. I don't know, maybe one day, like once my son is like, he's 7.5 now, but maybe when he's 17.
Yeah.
But it's, if anyone even cares, wants to see me go scream about shit on stage, right? But like, so yeah, but maybe one day. But for now, it's like we are not saying no to things, but we're just being really selective with what we say yes to.
Yeah.
And that has proven to be good for our age bracket.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like nowadays that's available. I feel like before band was an all or nothing thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely how we treated it. I remember when Defeater started catching on, we all knew, and we kind of realized like, it's happening. Get on. Like, we're taking the ride. Let's go. Yep.
And nowadays you feel like I can just make, and it's kind of a beautiful thing to just be able to just make music for the sake of just enjoying it and making music again, and play shows and still get the fun of playing dope shows with sick people and other great bands.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, for me, it's been great because, in contrast to later Defeater, where there was like expectations for record sales and record cycles and tours, and this record needs to come out at this time because then we'll get X offer, which is good for the band. It's all that stuff, the stuff. And I'm not like mad at that. That brought me, again, to meet my wife. That brought me to every corner of the world I never thought I played a sold out show in Moscow, right? Like,
yeah, that's so sick.
You know what I mean?
Very few people, especially Americans, get to do that.
Right. So like, yeah, man, like, yeah, it was worth it for sure. But from like just a purely artistic standpoint, just making music, especially after all these years of experience and stuff, like just making a record that I stand behind, and I don't have to care like if it fits anything, whatever. Ironically and consequently, the record's doing great. We sold
Yeah.
out. We sold out. In
Yeah.
our first week. Yeah,
That's awesome.
and and with less than 2 weeks, we're over 100,000 streams on the record, which is not like gangbusters, but for like a punk and hardcore band, like
That's huge for anything in a niche genre, especially
Yeah.
of a first thing in a niche genre. Like that's huge.
Yeah. So we're really, really grateful for that. And I think it's a testament to, people, because Quinn from Verse is our leads the band on vocals. And like, we've just got Defeater guys in the band, and like, we've just got a really great band. So we've got people both like being interested because of our previous efforts. So that's helpful too. But I think also like, it would, if we didn't take it really seriously, if we didn't like really make the best record we possibly could, then it wouldn't have sold out. We wouldn't be at where we are with streams, and that feels nice. It feels nice to lean into something just purely from a creative standpoint and stand behind it 100%, and then have that, because that's like what we all do this for, really.
Yeah.
Like, it's for like the emotional resonance that we get with people who enjoy the art that we make.
For sure. And it could have been very easily for it to be a legacy pull from like, hey, here's a bunch of dudes from hardcore and people from hardcore bands that you previously listened to. And here's a record that they made. And then it could have felt half baked and like it could have been whatever. But the fact that you guys really honed in, and obviously we've probably seen some of those records come out that we're all kind of like, meh, it's kind of meh. You know what I mean?
There's been a rash of those.
Yeah, I was about to say, not throwing anybody under the bus there, but I've definitely heard some that I was like, ooh, they did not write this with any kind of gumption behind it. And it's cool to see that, you guys were able to come together and like make this really awesome, because I did check it out a little bit before we chatted. And yeah, it's a very sick record.
Thank you very much.
So yeah. So if anybody's planning on going to Fest, they should definitely go to Fest.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of Fest anyway, as a Southeast, underground lover of music anyway. So my friends, the Callous Cowboys, Fest helped them pop off pretty heavy. So
no question. Yeah, that band's dope.
Yeah, they're all good people. They're from my area, but they're local-ish area, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, that all the hardcore bands and like, underground bands kind of all know each other. So that makes sense. It's a fun little scene down here. But dude, I'm very excited for that. Where would you want to send people if people want to check you out, if people want to know more about you, or, the whole spiel?
Yeah, I should probably get a link tree. But I would say, you can go to jmaas.com. You can go to, it's master.io, so maastr.io. If you're interested in that. fasttrackacademy.co. And then, it's at J_Maas. My last name is spelled Dutch and weird. It's Maas. And you can find me on Instagram. Hit me up. I've been scaling up my one-on-one mentoring program for helping other engineers. So I feel like there's probably a decent amount of your listeners that would be good candidates for that. So if any of them, you can email me, j@jmaas.com. You can hit me up on Instagram, whatever it is. And if anybody wants to, I'd love to have a chat. That's been something that, as I guess I'm becoming an old dog, you know what I mean? Like, as I'm 20 years in my, middle-aged man in my 40s, helping people, I think I get something really similar out of that than I do with Love Letter, which is like, it's like connecting with people on something that they enjoy. And so that's been good. We've taken quite a few guys from part-time to full-time, if anyone's interested in that, or if you're just interested in being someone who can make fucking sick mixes. We help with that too.
Sick. Well, Jay, thanks so much for being on the podcast with me today, and taking the time and having a dope chat, and hopefully, getting everybody a little more acquainted with you and all of the many, many, many things that you do.
Thanks,
You're a man of multiple facets, I would say.
Yeah, busy for sure.
Yeah, I think busy's an understatement.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. Well,
But
thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
This has been great.
man. Listeners, thanks so much for listening. Go check out Jay. All the links for everything, Monster and Fast Track and his personal stuff and all that will be in the description of the audio and video podcast. So thanks so much, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Later. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast. If you could take the time to like, subscribe. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other audio platform, go ahead and make sure you're subscribed, and also leave a rating and a review. It helps the show get out to new people, and we're trying to grow every single week. Once again, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast, and we'll see you next week.